Hello and welcome to another edition of Ambient Talkie, a show where we dive into some weird and wacky equipment and call it whatever you want music. My name is Andy from Two Round Robins, and I hope you're ready for some classical stuff. Today I'm gonna be describing how I created the track Lark from my newest release Vaughan, which is available on my Bandcamp for a very small price. Link will most obviously be available to you in the description below, so check it out. So the idea for Vaughan release was very simple. For those that do not know, Ralph Vaughan Williams was an English composer known for being one of the most influential British symphonists and remains one of my favorite composers as well. His style is often described as a blend of harmonic delicacy of British folk song mixed with a more impressionistic orchestral style of French composers like Debussy or Ravel. I was quickly drawn to his beautiful sounding symphonies and orchestral works, so much so that in the past 2 months I was thoroughly engaged with creating a short EP of sorts that will include some of my favorite thematic material from his work, mixed with audio manipulation and additional low fidelity sounds. Like with everything, I believe one should creatively limit oneself with certain rules in order to narrow down the possibilities. I see this as something that kind of helps me put much more focus on song making rather than spending too much time choosing the right method to pull something off when I'm mid-song creation, of course. With this in mind, the so-called rules were as follows. Let's start with the equipment. One of the first rules was that we should be using only mlre script running on nornsshield. Why? Well, because it's an amazing Norns script not only for live sampling but also for sample playback, and I was most accustomed to it by now. mlre is an extended version of Tan's classic script MLR. This newer version was created by SonoCircuit, and going by the description, it was done with keeping it as simple and close to the original as possible. I could go on how it differs from MLR, but I think Peter Bark covered that in his My Favorite Norns Scripts series, so you can check that out. I'll definitely put a link in the description below. But mlre for me has obviously a lot of advantages. One of these was that it has 6 buffers which have a varying speed control, it has filters, volume control, etc. It has macro slots, so where you can basically record automation for pitch, volume, panning, whatever you wish. It has an LFO section which you can use in order to give your composition or songs a bit more movement. It has a way of recording samples directly on the fly, as well as loading samples directly from Norn's own drive. And it also has a transpose view where you can change the pitch on the fly based on a scale that you have chosen in the parameters menu. And most of all, it's great for improvisation. And it's great for performances. A link to the documentation will be available to you in the description. So now that we know the equipment, let's talk about material. So I would use up to 3 samples from Vaughan Williams's work that are short enough to be easily manipulated, and additional material from various other sources such as OP1. OP1 sampled into Coco Quantus and then that resampled here. Granular samples from Tardigrade app on iPhone. Kalimba sampled into Coco Quantus, and so on and so on. So a few more additional sounds were in order to create this project here. So now that we know how the project was made, let's take a closer look into Lark. Lark uses, without any surprise, one of Vaughan Williams' most famous works, and this is Lark Ascending. It's a romance for violin and orchestra, and it's one of my favorite classical pieces as well. This work was inspired by a poem that was written by George Meredith, which basically is a homage to the lark itself. And like I said, personally, lark ascending is one of my favorite musical, compositional and classical pieces there is. But so I was very much excited to use this in this little project. However, why this particular piece works so well is that it has solo violin passages that are just lovely and lyrical, and they're very, very good to sample very, very nicely into mlre here. So just by going with the score, you can see it has this lovely violin passages that kind of mimic, I think, the movements and the bird song of a lark itself. So naturally I sampled a few of these, as you can hear just here. Now another thing that I have sampled is I think this little motif here that, you know, makes its rounds around the score, and it sounds something like this. And the best part about mlre is that you can slow the samples way down. And now you see that going from this lovely pastoral sounding string movement, we have come to something far darker, much more brooding and ominous in sense. The same thing could be done with the solo violin part, as you can hear in this section. So of course this was something that that was done right at the beginning. I was just messing around to see how the sample would react in different ways, and this was the idea of how to open up not just the track itself, but also the creation of this project. So, like I said, the first three buffers are meant to use Vaughan Williams's work. The second three are mostly other sounds, so like this from OP1. That's just I think I really can't remember which sample this was, but it kind of worked wonderfully with this brooding or ominous sounding strings here. So it adds just a little of this very mellow movement. Another element was, so you can hear it a bit better, was this sample here. And this is OP1 sampled in the Coco Quantus, and then this resampled into mlre. And this has such lovely Coco Quantus noise, and of course I needed it to be incorporated in the whole of this section. And of course pitching it up makes sense, and it is one of the most important parts. And of course the good thing about mlre is that you can record the movements, as you can see here. Now of course I recorded it beforehand because I needed to be prepared for the performance, but one cool thing is that also you can use the LFO. So let's say I'm gonna use the fifth buffer, the pen control here, and now as you can see here it kind of moves up and down the panoramic field. So of course this will add a bit more movement to the whole soundscape. Now last but not least we have this. This is basically another sample from OP1. Well, originally it's from nornsshield. It's the autumn engine from the false script incorporated or sampled into OP1, and then this resampled into Coco Quandas, and then this sampled back into mlre. So it's sample inception as it is. But the reason why this is here, it's gonna give me a bit more harmonic content going from something that's here. So think of this more as this transient like sound mangling motifs, and then you have some harmony that's corresponding to the Vaughan Williams's material in this section here. So of course we have stuff like this here. But let's talk structure. Now, as you can see, I have my material and enough option to improvise something. The idea here was that I start somewhere, let's say here for example, like I have told you before, all dark and ominous. And I can gradually move this to a more hopeful tone just by moving the pitch in a higher position. But here's the problem. Moving it without, making it completely obvious that you are moving the sample or moving the material up a notch is kind of hard. So there are a few fixes to this problem. One of this is that you basically use timing in order to know where to put it in. So I'm just gonna wait here, and then now we have a much smoother transition. But this works here because it kind of stops here, so it gives me amp time to basically do, and it doesn't really work with this, with the shorter section that I have sampled here in buffer number 1. So what to do what to do in order to fix this? Well, another good way of doing this is just looking at the solution from looking for a solution from a far broader spectrum so the composition as a whole. So let's say if we start here, I'm going to use other material in order to let the listener know, hey, focus on that and forget that something's happening here. And this is where this comes in. So let's say if we have something like this, we're hardly focusing on the on the violin parts and orchestral parts here. So what I can do is basically just slowly fade them out and then slowly bring them in. And now we have something new. And even like with violins as well, you can do the same. And you can hear them. So now we're focusing on this. And once I get all the violin material basically how I want it, or the Vaughan Williams material how I want it, I can stop the movements here and just let them focus far more with whatever's happening here. And thus creating another spectrum of sound. So if I started beforehand with this darker sense, I can use the material from here in order to move myself or to move this material octaves above, basically changing the whole character and making the track feel a bit more hopeful. So I'm changing the emotional dynamics of the track by tricking the listener to listen to stuff that's happening somewhere not in the world of Vaughan Williams's material here. Okay, so now that you know that, what we could do is I'll perform the piece, and you can basically see what I'm doing. You can basically figure out what's the deal and how I think when I perform on mlre. So I'm just gonna do that right now. So yeah, that was it. I hope you have found something useful out of this little exploration of how I made lark and how I perform on mlre. Link to the project will be linked down below, so you can take a listen if you want to. You can support it if you want to. If you want to know something more about this little amazing script of mlre, I'll link Peter Bark's video down below, as well as some additional content that you might find useful. Thanks again for watching. Please join me next time, and if you like this type of content, feel free to subscribe. It really helps the channel out. Have a wonderful rest of the evening, morning or afternoon, whenever you might be watching this, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Thank you for sticking around.